All right. Good morning, everyone. So
Morning.
today we are starting a new book. We wrapped up Judges, or not Judges. Whoo. Oh yeah, it was Judges.
Yeah.
Huh. Judges and Joshua. I always flip them around. Anyways, we finished Judges, and I was curious if after a week you had any lingering thoughts about that book before we jump into Samuel. So any lingering thoughts about Judges, or are we just glad to be gone with it?
Glad to be gone with it.
Okay. Yeah, Gretchen?
I guess I was thinking today, a lot of us want to have a king that rules over us. And so and I don't mean literally, but we want something that says, okay, this is the way you'll take care of it. And
Yeah. Yeah, king or not a king is a lot of the question of First and Second Samuel. Are kings good? Are kings bad? And there does seem to be this tug and pull in the human spirit, where on the one hand, most of us don't like to be told what to do. Like one of the surefire ways to get people resisting what you are wanting them to do is say, you have no other option, you have to do this. And everyone's knee-jerk reaction is, well, no, you can't tell me what to do. But on the other edge, there are so many questions and decisions to make in life. It's often a point of security when all of a sudden you're like, I don't want to make the decisions. Like, I need someone to organize this, tell me what to do, and I can do it. And I feel like both of those impulses live in most humans, where we want the freedom to choose what we want to do, and yet, in reality, we don't want to choose everything. Sometimes it's really helpful to have someone in leadership to make hard decisions when you're not the expert on everything. And so the book we're going into is that tension right there. The people of Israel have been living through a time of no centralized leadership, and as we see, it didn't go well. But the question is, was a king the right answer to this?
I think it depends a lot on the king and how he organizes things. And I don't,
And that's the other question is like, what separates a good leader from a bad leader? What's a good king and what's a bad king?
Yeah.
And there's no simple answers. So while the book we're going into is less bloody than Judges, it's no less complicated. And the thing I'll say at the outset is this is the part of the Bible where some people want to draw like life lessons and copy exactly what's in the Bible. The characters we're about to meet are complex. They are not straightforward. Sometimes you're on their side and sometimes you're like, oh boy, you messed up. And I think it's important to allow that kind of humanness to exist in this text, is that these are not universally good characters and these are not universally bad characters, because everyone has good and bad in them. And so this is, in some ways, I love this, the stories of First and Second Samuel, if only because the humanness is on full display in these texts. And so that is this space where we are going into, is a very human, very flawed solution to practical problems of they need leadership, and how do we do this? So on a practical level, a little bit of background. I don't have a full PowerPoint for the introduction to First and Second Samuel, and that's basically because the next two books are coming from these same sources as the previous books that we have been reading. Basically from the end, or from Joshua through Second Kings, it's a block of text which is very historical. It's from the same kind of chunk of history where the Deuteronomistic historian is taking a bunch of stories and knitting them together into a longer narrative. We break 1st and 2nd Samuel up functionally because it's helpful to have a middle point, but these two books are functionally 2 chapters of the same book. They are functionally one unit. And so a lot of introductions to them will be an introduction to 1st and 2nd Samuel. It just helps to have a break between this long story. If you're looking at it through, if you want to zoom out a little farther, 1st and 2nd Samuel and then 1st and 2nd Kings are kind of the mega unit of, it tells the entire story of the kings of Israel. So we are starting at the beginning of the monarchy in Israel, and 2nd Kings ends with the invasion of Babylon and the fall of Jerusalem. So this is kind of the history of the monarchy. Notably, there is a king before King David, so we're not jumping into David right away. And we're actually even before we get to David, and before David there is Saul, and before Saul there is Samuel. So 1st and 2nd Samuel is named after the prophet Samuel, who we are introduced to today. So these books are basically Samuel being the prophetic religious guiding voice that lives through 2 kings. And so that is why these books are named after him. It is because he is actually the consistent character through both of King Saul and King David's reign. And then when you get to Kings, that's when you get Solomon, and then all the other kings afterwards.
So Samuel is still alive throughout he's still alive when David is king?
Yes, he is.
I realize that. Because he wasn't a king.
He was not a king, and we will find out what happens to Saul because Saul's life is cut short. He does not live into old age.
Right.
Looking at the introduction to some of the historical background of this book, there's a few interesting points that I'll just pull out really quick. First of all, while this is part of the Deuteronomistic history, it looks like the Deuteronomistic historian didn't really tinker with these stories too much. They basically just have arranged them and put a little bit of commentary between the different episodes. There's basically 4 main episodes. We will see the capture of the Ark of the Covenant by the Philistines, so enemy interference, stories about King Saul, David's rise to power, and then the actions of one of David's sons, which takes a long time to tell that story. So there's 4 main episodes that are kind of stitched together. There's a question on where a lot of this book will be have an anti-monarchical tone, and there's a question of where this tone came from, whether it was people being honest about their opinions at the time and they didn't like what the kings are doing, or if it comes as like a retrospective of they were recording the history and looking back and, hey, these guys didn't do as good of a job as we had hoped. So we will be talking about, once again, what's the tone of the story? Does the author like the king? Does the author not like the king? But there is a bit of hostility towards the monarchy that is fairly apparent in these stories. But lastly, this won't affect necessarily our reading as... Whoop. Oh, there we go. You all froze for a moment. Can you all still hear me?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Then I'm going to keep going. All y'all either were sitting very still or my computer froze.
Listening.
You have frozen, at least on my screen, 2 or 3 times. Okay. But only for a moment.
Only for a moment. All right. I'm going to guess it's the internet on my side then. So let's Every time it's windy, I think the internet cable swing and it affects the internet at the church. So I'm gonna hope that's the only time it happens. All right. But the last part that's kind of weird about 1st and 2nd Samuel is evidently the primary source that we normally use for translating the Hebrew text. So I believe it's called the Aleppo Codex, which is like the official scrolls that the Jewish community have like sanctioned, and like that's their official copy. Evidently the Hebrew in 1st and 2nd Samuel is not good. It's a defective form. So like something happened to these books where the Hebrew was not very good and they don't know why. And so there's a lot of things when translating. If there's differences between our different translations, it's because it's gone through different iterations. Some are looking at other manuscripts. The Qumran texts, so the Dead Sea Scrolls, have a lot of influence on modern translations of 1st and 2nd Samuel, but evidently the language is very weird. So if something seems strange, bring it up and there might be a translation issue because the Hebrew is doing weird things and they don't know why. So that's just a heads up. If something looks weird, there's probably a reason why. So any other questions as we jump into this text is kind of like the background of where this is coming from, kind of what the scope of 1st and 2nd Samuel is.
I read the introduction in my Bible, which is the Oxford. It talked about whether or not this was history, and it said, well, it's not really history, it's a story. But they had several reasons for that, and one of them was that it was beautifully written. And let's see, 3 reasons for doubting that the book is a narrative of history, and one of them was it was a creative literary masterpiece. Now, when I read it along, it didn't feel like a masterpiece to me. So I wondered and I expected it to be, like the King James version or something like that, something really gorgeous. And it would seem to be fairly straightforward. It's clear and it's nice, but do you know what they're talking about? There is this.
Yes.
Hannah's poem, but apart from that.
All right, give me 2 seconds. I'm looking up something real quick.
Let's see. It's an omniscient narrator who reports private conversations and personal thoughts, full of word plays, intricate plots, and subtle twists, and portraits of complex characters.
So what that comment is talking about is, what genre is this story? What is the genre? Thinking about like Genesis, or Genesis is always the easiest comparison. Genesis has a very mythological tonality to how it tells stories.
And it's beautiful.
And it's right. And it has beautifulness or beauty baked into the language. But then you kind of get into the stories of Abraham and they still feel like they are closer to legend than they are history. Because they're still like and this is why this is named this thing. And you have those like elements of explanation and legend that you see very much in that aspect of it. When you're getting to 1st and 2nd Samuel and 1st and 2nd Kings, this is when the story feels much more tied to history, because it seems clear that the writing of the story is much closer to when the events happened. Because as we talked about with some of those older stories, that a lot of Genesis and Exodus is being written down during the time of the monarchy. So they are writing things down, which gives an appearance of it being history, because it does seem like these stories are closer to when it's happening. However, there is stylistic elements, like they mentioned, like private conversations are included, and it's very unlikely that those private conversations would be public knowledge.
Yeah,
and
sure.
so there's still an element of I would call this more closer to historical fiction than history.
Yeah, that makes sense.
When you get into the First and Second Kings, after you get past Solomon, there we go. After you get past Solomon, you're going to see it very much turn closer to history. But like I've mentioned more than once, the ancient world did not understand history the way our historians today understand history.
Okay.
So some of these stories they're being told for a reason. Some of it's propaganda. There is one story I'm thinking about in particular that is as part of the stories of David. It is 100% propaganda, and I remember one of the comments that one of my professors made. I will share it because I love it. But these stories exist for a reason, but they are closer to the source, which is why some people want to call them history. This is the point in time where we do have archaeology of this, and the archaeology seems to back up the stories. So that's the other thing of like the archaeology is backing up the stories much more than like the fall of Jericho. We found Jericho, it had walls. The story of the walls falling down is probably more legend than it is history. We've now gotten to the point where the legend is much closer to the history.
Okay. Okay.
So,
thank you.
The other thing to keep in mind, and these stories are actually told 2 times, specifically when it comes to the stories of David. Not as much Samuel and not as much Saul, but the 2 books of the Bible that I would say are 2 of the most ignored books are 1st and 2nd Chronicles. We will not be going through 1st and 2nd Chronicles because it's like pulling my teeth to read them. I will personally ask that we not cover them because they say almost the same thing as 1st and 2nd Samuel and 1st and 2nd King, but it's a much more polished story and it gives a much rosier picture of David. Like the story of David and Bathsheba does not exist in 1st and 2nd Chronicles. 1st and 2nd Chronicles basically exist as a comparison to all the other stories. This is literally like the chronicles of the monarchy. It is a very dry book that goes through the history once again.
It's a boring.
No. I will say, so when I was studying for my one of the exams for ordination, it's called the Bible content exam. You do it at the beginning of your ordination process. And to prepare for it, I was listening to the Bible from cover to cover, which is the only way that I could get through a lot of books. And I had finished 2nd Kings and I was like, whew, we're done with the history. We're done with that. And then Chronicles, 1st Chronicles start. And I kid you not, there is 9 chapters that is simply a list of names. And I was so confused because it lists the entire genealogy up to the time of David, just in order. And I'm like, I was in the middle of like an hour-long walk, and all of a sudden just the person starts reading names for literally 30 minutes. Just a list of names, which is why we are not doing Chronicles. Occasionally I will, when we get into the stories of David, I may assign a few chapters of Chronicles just as comparison. I just want you to know 1st and 2nd Chronicles exists. It says very similar things, but not quite. Ooh. All right. Hello? Oh, are you guys back?
Yes.
We never left.
I
We never
know,
left.
it's my internet, I'm telling you, it's my problem here. Okay, I'm going to do something. I think I can fix my internet, but I have to do two things. I have to leave and come back in because I need to switch which internet I'm connected to. So I am going to assign a host and then leave and then come back, okay?
Okay.
Because let's see.
I'm not here.
Actually, hold on. I'm gonna see if I can just switch my internet real quick. If I disappear, know that I will be back.
We'll admit you if necessary.
All right, there we go. Hopefully, all right. It seems like I've jumped, I was on the wrong Wi-Fi, unfortunately. I think this will be better now. So hopefully I won't time out again. Anyways, with that, any other questions or comments, thoughts about Samuel or 1 Samuel, or should we dive into actually the story itself? All right,
No.
Let's go ahead and dive in then. So we start not just with an introduction to who Samuel is, we get the story about where Samuel came from. And the story is set up. Chapter 1, verse 1. There is a man. He comes from the hill country of Ephraim. I did not attempt to pronounce his name ahead of time. Elkanah.
Elkanah,
Elkanah.
My mother had a great grandfather whose name was Elkanah Babbitt.
Ah,
and I thought
right.
that's the funniest sounding name, and now I know where it came from.
Man, that is a biblical reference that not many people knew. Okay, so Elkanah.
And he had a wife named Hannah. I don't know.
Right. So this guy, he has 2 wives. One has a bunch of children, and one of them is barren. And it seems like his favorite wife is the one without children. So I want you all to think if this sounds familiar or not, and where we've heard this before.
Yes.
So
people are always born to barren women.
Right. So why? Why are important people born to barren women?
Well, they must be a gift from God.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, yeah. And Hannah actually went directly to God herself.
Right. I mean, there's a sense that, okay, if a child is born after, like, God, her words, God had closed her womb, and it shows a level of devotion with all the prayer and everything that, okay, to open her womb, it's not just like coincidence. It's not just like luck of the draw. It's really seen that, like, if the Lord closed it and the Lord opened it, this child is going to be special. But what are some of the other, I know we've said that this is a trope. Who are some of the other women that have had this happen?
Sarah. Rebecca. We just had this one, we had one recently. What was it? Is it the one of Samson's mother? What is
Samson? And Rachel. So the 3 matriarchs all had this issue where they had to go to God and pray before their child would be born. So this is this is a trope everyone would know. And this is once again why it feels more historical, this is still veering into legend, is because this is how you get legendary status. You have a woman who needs to do extra things to conceive a special baby. And so there is one part that I do think is very tender in this story, and that is Elkanah's response to his wife. So the wife that has all the children is making fun of Hannah because she has like sons and daughters, and Elkanah is giving like the right, like equal portion to them all. He's providing for that side of the family, but then he's giving a double portion to his favorite wife. And when she's still sad, his response is, "Why do you weep? Am I not worth 10 sons?" Like, he's like, is my love not enough? Like, I dote on you. Like, why are you sad? You're my favorite. So what do you think about Elkanah? Is he doing his best as both father and husband to two wives? Is it bad that he has a favorite, or is this just kind of, we've seen this before, this is following what we know?
Well, I think in this case, we kind of like it that he has a favorite. And he's especially attentive to not only her person, but to her spirit, to her soul. He cares. There's a kind of romanticness about this, or romanticism. No.
Yeah.
Well, he does love her, but by saying, "Am I not enough?" is kind of making it about Hannah's feeling of inadequacy because she can't have a baby.
And if in those days children were important to have as a source of labor and help for the family, and here this husband is showing special favor to the woman that can't produce any children.
That's right.
So different.
Yeah.
So he does say it doesn't matter, right?
So there's two tensions in the story that's kind of interesting. The first is, in a way, he's saying, like, yeah, you're not doing your normal gender role, but also I don't care. Like, he doesn't care, it seems like, that she's not fulfilling the normal gender role. In some ways, he's like, I don't care about the expectations of you being a mother. I value you, which I think is a really cool aspect of it. But on the other side, this is where there's actually, it makes me think of Pride and Prejudice of all things. A lot of people deride Lizzie Bennet's mother for being hysterical and by always trying to like marry her daughters off. But there's a reason, or there's a point where she's the most rational person in the story, because if her husband dies, they're all out of a house. And so there's a very practical reason why her mother is constantly trying to marry off her daughters. And that same pressure is present in this story of, like, Hannah, like, she may be the favorite wife, but if her husband dies, she's out of a house. She needs a male heir to inherit because she doesn't get to. And so she may be the favorite, but she's also thinking about, like, what happens if my beloved husband dies? This is not going to be good for me. So you have the tension of, like, there's the practical side of, like, she needs basically a retirement plan. Not only is our children your labor force, but also they're your retirement plan. And on the other side, she is the favorite. She's getting a double portion.
But she can't spend it. She can't buy property. It doesn't, it's nice to get it, but it doesn't do her any good.
Right. So she has taken to then going to the temple with her husband, or not the temple at this point. This is in the age where there's still just the tabernacle. So the kind of portable temple tent of meeting. Shiloh is quickly developing into an important place religiously. So we often think of the important place is being in the tribe of Judah. Let's see, where is Jerusalem? Okay, Jerusalem is right here, which is kind of on the border of Judah and Benjamin. So this is the area. When you get much further south, it quickly becomes very desert-like. And remember, Jerusalem is on the top of a mountain. But it has yet to be chosen as God's city. This is still, if you remember in Judges, this city came up. It is actually still kind of a Canaanite city. Instead, Shiloh is the important place, which is where this red arrow is. It is in a much greener area. You'll see it is directly across from the Jordan River. And this will become part of the northern kingdom. And so I'm making a big deal of this now because I want you to remember it and put it in your back pocket, because this will become very important in 2 Kings. So it's going to be way down the line when Shiloh becomes very important for some political drama. But you need to know at this point, before Jerusalem is established, Shiloh is kind of the religious hub of where everything is. They stop moving the tabernacle around. The tabernacle kind of stays in Shiloh. The other, the little mini shrine that was developed against the rules, if you remember, the Levite came and just was at a household shrine. That's going to be up here in the like northern western part. So there's a second place up here, but Shiloh is going to be the center of a lot of these stories for a while. So anyways, they're going to Shiloh to do the sacrifices, and Hannah's being allowed to come along and pray alongside her husband. This may or may not have been appropriate. This is probably, she is being given special permission by her husband to do this. And specifically, she's going into the tent and praying very vigorously. And there's the episode we get to next is Eli the priest looks at this woman who is praying. It says her mouth is moving, but there's no sound coming out. And Eli, who is the priest at the time, he's like, this woman's drunk. This woman is drunk and she is being disorderly. I need to ask her to leave. So what do you think of this situation of a woman being in distress, praying with her whole heart, and the male priest going, this woman doesn't seem okay. I need to ask her to leave.
Well, I think it's especially when you mentioned that about she couldn't pray near the men. I mean, she was already in a subservient position, and her not behaving right, and she should have been like a wallflower. Her temperament should have been quiet, submissive, sitting off to the side, praying, yes, but quietly, sedately.
The note says that most people prayed out loud, and she was praying silently, and that's why he thought she was drunk.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is weird.
Yeah, that is, isn't it, when you think about it?
But she was so overcome.
Yeah, usually when people get drunk, they get very loud, not silent.
Yeah.
She got noticed. She got noticed.
Yes.
Yeah.
Not every woman there got noticed. She did.
She did.
There's I forget who created this quote, but I remember reading it a while ago, that well-behaved women rarely make history.
That's right.
And so, yeah, she gets noticed. Eli is like, okay, or like asks her to like, hey, you need to fix what's going on here. And she tells him like, her plea that she's pleading for God, because she wants a son, specifically a son. And her vow is, if I get a son, he is going to be a Nazirite. We've seen this before this is what Samson is. This is likely what John the Baptist was. This is the vow where they will not drink any kind of alcohol and they will not cut their hair. And this is like a special vow, a person devoted to the temple. Notably, this is a way to have someone be a religious figure without being a Levite. The Levites kind of have the automatic in to be a part of the temple and the temple process. If you are not a part of the tribe of Eli, having your son be a Nazirite is kind of a way to have them be a part of the religious establishment. But there's another thing that she's not saying outright, but is, I believe, kind of underpinning her idea that if she gets a son, she is going to make him a Nazirite and kind of give him to the tabernacle. Does this sound familiar to anything we've already discussed before of why would she devote her son first and foremost to the temple?
Well, wasn't that her one of the ways that she was hoping to get God's attention and have a baby?
Right. So there's a certain point of like quid pro quo. God, you give me a child, I'll give him back to you. So there's a little bit of that where it's kind of trying to barter with God. Yes. But there's another concept that I think is underpinning this.
Okay.
So it's the idea of the first fruits being God's, where the
offering.
So it's offering back. So like you're the first animal born to, like if you have a sheep, the first time it gets pregnant and has lambs, those first lambs are devoted to God. They are meant to be sacrificed. When the grain comes for harvest, the first grain you harvest is given to God as a burnt offering. The first child, if you remember with Abraham, Isaac was initially going to be sacrificed, and instead God said, no, we're going to have additional offerings for your first child. She's kind of making a first fruits offering of, God, if you give me a son, my first son I'm going to give back to you as a devoted offering, and the first fruit of her womb is going to be given back to God. We see this.
Then the little.
Yeah, go for it.
I was just going to say the little boy gets raised at the temple by other people. It's so sad. She doesn't have this little boy to raise.
So yes. However, we see, let's see, where is it referenced? So Hannah ends up having more children after this one. So part of the thought is, I will give the first one to God, and this will be such a blessing, and God will reward me with more children. That's kind of the first fruit offering mentality. You give the first grain to God because you trust that God's going to give you an abundant harvest, and you're going to have enough. But you do it at the beginning, not the end, because it's the trust that's important. And so you give your first child to God, trusting that God's going to give you more children. So I believe she has 3 more sons after Samuel.
Well, that gives her other children, but it doesn't. I keep thinking about this little boy being raised
in an institution.
It wouldn't fly today.
No.
So what are the other benefits of, like, why would it be, in her world, why would it be seen as a good thing to have Samuel being raised by the institution of, it's not the temple at this point, it's the tabernacle, but it functions like the temple, but the tabernacle, why would she be willing for the priest to raise her son? What's the benefit?
Well, it would give her some status in the
Yes.
community. After all, she's the mother of the chief altar boy, or whatever his title is.
Right.
Yeah.
And we think about the Catholic families that big Catholic families have designated somebody to be the priest or the nun. They don't do that anymore, I don't think, but that was one of the things that somebody got, and there was a lot of pressure. It's probably the same thing, but
So there's a dual function there, which is why it's a very traditional practice to have many kids and give one of them to the church, give one of them to the tabernacle or the temple. If you expect to have a lot of kids, it makes inheritance easier. You have one kid that's not going to inherit, but has status. They will bring status to the family, but you don't have to divvy up property afterwards for it.
oh,
There's another reason, and that is this is a status that you can really only achieve if you give the child to the institution. Because if Samuel was to grow up in her household, he would grow up as kind of the same status, likely be a farmer or a herder, or we don't really get their profession. But Samuel would be an agriculturalist and would be that would be his fate. By giving him to the tabernacle as a child, he all of a sudden has a different world that is opened up to him. He's not going to be an agriculturalist. He will be a religious official that gives you a different trajectory in life, that opens more doors. Yeah, Larry.
And every year his mother comes to visit him and has made a new costume, new priestly garb for him, or church garb at least to wear.
Right. So that kind of assumes that she's still kind of responsible for room and board for him. It's not that she's just shoving off and putting him in an orphanage. She is funding his religious education and his development as a part of the priestly temple or tabernacle. So this, in some ways, is a much better life than she can give him. She gets status. She gets but there's also, she's hopefully, by making this dedication for her son to the temple, she also is going to get more children, which does seem to come true.
That's verse 21.
Thank you.
3 sons, 2 daughters.
But the other part of it, or the other thing, is she does get some time with the child. So she waits until Samuel is weaned, which could be anywhere from 2 to 3 years old, depending. So she is getting the younger years with him, because functionally, it's kind of like preschool. He probably needs to be potty trained by the time she hands him off. So that's, she needs to get him at the stage where, like, the priests are not having to change dirty diapers, but also he can feed himself. That's the functionality. Like, he can eat himself and he can hold his bowels, so the priests aren't having to act as mothers to him. So that kind of gives you the window of, like, Samuel is probably a well-trained toddler by the time she hands him off. She is not handing over an infant. They breastfed for much longer than we do today. So
now this one is a Sunday school story.
Yes, it is.
It's so sweet. A new coat, a mom who remembers. Oh.
Right. So then in chapter 2, it starts with Hannah's prayer, and we get this lovely, I mean, it's beautiful. We don't get any extra details to the prayer, but this is a hymn that was likely commonly sung that's attributed to Hannah. So a lot of these hymns are just well known. Samuel becomes very famous, so it makes sense that this famous hymn would be attributed to the mother of this very famous person. But then we hear about the situation that Samuel is entering into. Specifically, Eli is the head priest at the time. Eli's name is the first 2 letters, E-L, L, is
God.
the Hebrew word for God. So Eli's name has God as a part of it. So he's given a very godly name as the priest. But evidently his 2 sons were scoundrels. And there's a long description of why they are considered scoundrels, and I was curious if it makes sense. It specifically deals with offerings and foods. And did you understand what was going on with them trying to get the meat? Okay. So there are ways to do sacrifices and ways to feed priests, and the way to feed the priestly people is connected with the sacrifices given to God. So there is sacrifices that are basically like roasted over a pit, or roasted over the fire where they turn it. And then there's different meat that goes into a boiling pot. The fundamental thing you have to understand which or how part of it is given to God and part of it is given to priests is that the fat is God's portion of the sacrifice. So when you put it over the fire and you see the fat kind of drip off the meat and it hits the fire and the fire sizzles, it is seen as God accepting that sacrifice and kind of consuming the fat. And if you put it in a pot and you boil it, you will see the fat kind of melt off of the meat. If you've ever done like a pot roast or something and you see like the liquid come out of the meat and there's that like layer of fat on top, that is God's portion of the sacrifice. The thing is, I don't know how you all like your meat cooked. It seems like his sons did not like their meat overcooked. But in order to get God's part of the sacrifice, you kind of have to roast the meat a long time till it stops dripping with fat. And you need to boil it long enough that all the fat kind of exits the meat. And it seems like they didn't like this because fat was, in our world today, I'm not a person that likes the fatty part of the meat, but I know some people really do. And in the ancient world, fat was less common, so they really liked eating the fat. So what the sons are doing is they're asking for raw meat. They're basically getting it straight out of the pot right after, like it's put into the pot, and then they're kind of taking a big fork and going, "Thank you, this is ours." Or taking it off of the fire and just taking their portion before God's portion has been separated. So they are not waiting for the fat to leave the meat. They are taking it ahead of time so they can cook it how they want. They might like their steaks medium rare. They might like it almost raw, or they might like it like medium rare, but not well done. They're like, "Oh, we don't want that well done meat cooked over the fire. We want our medium rare steaks. Thank you." And so they're taking the sacrifices before God's portion is separated, thus stealing from God. So does that kind of explain why this whole meat debacle is in place?
Yes.
So they are taking their authority as the head priest's son, and they are taking the meat before it's ready. So as an ancient Israelite reader who is reading of what the sons of the head priest are doing, what are you thinking hearing that you are making sacrifices and then someone is stealing your sacrifice from God? What would be the reaction?
Well, you both, first of all, you think that's not fair. I gave that to God, and they're taking what belongs to God. The other thing is that I think in the back of your head is, where's their dad in all of this? Why isn't he raising those boys to do it right? I mean, really?
Yeah. So were they blaming Eli for his kids?
Not outwardly, but eventually they do, because it's a punishment of God punishes Eli.
Yeah.
By having the sons both die the same day.
He's been doing the priestly stuff for a long time, hasn't he?
Yeah, he's an older man, so
yeah.
Have you encountered this kind of family dynamic where like the parent seems like a good person by all accounts, but their children are absolutely rotten? Where it seems like almost they haven't like they didn't give their children enough boundaries or teach them, and so the children just run wild. And
Right.
at a certain point you're like, well, these children don't have good morals, but also where's the parent in this situation?
Right, right.
Yeah, Larry, check your mute. Larry, you're muted.
Didn't somebody else's son in the past take the good food?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, Jacob
Yeah.
and
And yet, I don't know, I can't remember, did that lead to some catastrophe? It just seemed that some people are born bad, maybe it's not really anybody's fault.
It does seem that way.
Yeah.
But you want to blame somebody,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
and you blame the parents. It's all the parents aren't doing that right. And we still do that.
Oh,
And most of us who have children say, really? We're not responsible when they're themselves. I mean, it's the tendency though is to.
I think there's always a both and, where sometimes it can be one part personality, and some people's personality just is very ingrained. And then there's another point where sometimes people are good people and not the best parents, and that happens sometimes. And parenting is difficult. But already one of the questions that's kind of entering into the text is, what happens when a role is inherited? Because that's one of the dynamics here. Is the priesthood is theoretically an inherited position. These two sons would inherit the role when Eli passes away, and the question is already, Eli may be a good priest, but are his sons going to be a good priest?
And he may have had them when he was old and not really up to paying attention to this as well. His younger sons were fine. I mean, they showed up in some other stories, I think, and they seemed okay.
Right. Oh, Larry, it just occurred to me, there's a story in Numbers where Aaron, the priest Aaron, has two older sons that are doing sacrifices, and they like get too close and do something unauthorized, and his two older sons like burst into flames.
Oh,
yeah.
So that it wasn't around food, but it has that similar tone of like the two older sons do something they're not supposed to.
Okay.
But
it wasn't as bad as this. It was, it had more to do with.
Well, who was it though that had the two sons? Was it Abraham or Jacob? It was one of those way back.
Yeah,
one of them was a schemer.
Right.
Oh yeah, that's Jacob and Esau.
Jacob and Esau.
Yeah, right.
But Esau was a hunter and had the good food, so.
Yeah.
But and he brought the good food to his father.
But Jacob said, well, I'll take that in.
But the other report that we get about these two sons comes in verse 22, that his sons were laying with the women at the entrance of the tent of meeting. This is one of those that there is women who stand at the entrance of the public place, and they sell their services. And evidently these two sons are more than happy to take these women up for their professional services.
Oh, so they weren't so great.
Yeah, so Larry?
It seems as if in a biblical story, you want to really condemn someone, you accuse them of having an affair with some woman, you know.
Yeah.
That seems to be the crude hour of depravity.
And that, yeah, this is a new one, you know, helping themselves to the sacrifice.
Yep.
That's
So you have one which shows kind of like a moral depravity. They are going to the women of the night, which I think are still even the women of the day at this point, but there's also the sense that they are stealing from God. So like the opinion of these two sons are not good. And in comes to town a man of God. And we get this prophecy towards the to Eli's family. And so what we are right about at time here, I understand, but let's quickly look at what the man of God says to Eli. This is kind of a stranger. This is not someone with an official role. This is just someone who is basically taken on a prophet role and coming in and saying, "Thus says the Lord."
It's not an angel.
I don't think so. The way this person approaches sounds like it, but the word messenger is saying a man of God and not a messenger of God, which implies human. But it feels kind of angelic, doesn't it? With that same kind of just a mysterious stranger comes in and says, "Thus says the Lord." So this is probably more of a prophet, and prophets don't have to be priests. So this is just someone who has gotten a word from God who's coming in to tell it like it is.
Okay.
So what's the critique here?
It's going to apply not only to Eli and to his sons, but it's for generations that they're kind of out of, not in touch with God and not going to be appreciated by God. And and I think that the tone of this is kind of interesting, isn't it? That Eli talks to his son, "Well, gosh, I hear you're doing some bad things." I mean, it's not like I've seen you do bad things. I'm hearing, and you know, you really shouldn't be doing that. I mean, there is kind of a portrayal of weakness of Eli in this, that he's too good to these guys. He should come down harder.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Yeah, so because Eli isn't able to like come down and say, "Hey boys, cut it out. Stop doing this thing I'm hearing you're doing." All of a sudden a man of God comes and gives them a reproach. So since Eli couldn't do it, God's going to come in and do it. Now zooming out Larry?
Doesn't he sort of accuse Eli of sharing in the stolen meat, you know, and so forth? He says that look with a greedy eye at my sacrifices and my offerings that I commanded, and honor your sons more than me by fattening yourselves on the choicest parts of every offering. So he's accusing Eli as well as the son.
So I think, yes. And I think part of this is, if you kind of extrapolate from what's being said, the sons are the ones are basically the ones taking the priestly portion of the meat. This is something that they were allowed to do once God's part had been consumed. And so they are doing their part. But what they are probably doing is they are taking the meat from the pot and from the spit, and they're giving it to the women or to the cooks or who's ever preparing the food. They are not doing it. They are just given permission to take their portion. And then they're probably eating it as a family. And so Eli is likely eating the same meat that the sons have chosen, And he's just kind of turning a blind eye to the fact that the meat's gotten a lot better in recent years. And so I mean, I feel like this is something that we still see in our political system today, is sometimes politicians, it's not that they're doing the corruption, it's just they are conveniently not looking at the corruption that makes their job easier.
Yeah.
And so that is seen as equal culpability. You're enjoying this meat that is mine, and you knew it, right? You knew that it wasn't properly taken, because you can tell. So his inaction is still counted as a slight against him, or a slight against God. It's not just his action, but it is his inaction.
For the sins we commit, and by omission and by commission.
Yeah.
And so what is the punishment? Oh yeah, Gary?
Well, I think it goes deeper than that, because when these children were not taught the sacred aspect of this, that rests on Eli. Right from the beginning, no matter how old he was or how young they were, you either, you can't be halfway. You can't. So once they start taking it, they committed the sin, and so did he, because he did not properly instruct them. Because they had a potential of following in his footsteps. So it was a very important responsibility.
And so what are the down the line effects if God doesn't intervene here, which the intervention is Eli's family's going to be cut off, and Samuel is functionally going to take their place. So his lineage is ended. Samuel will take over. But if that intervention had not happened, what would be the down the line effects of Eli not doing his duty in raising his son's rights? What happens in the long term?
It would just continue and probably get worse.
And then when Eli passes away, then what happens?
When the sons become priests.
They're cutting corners even further.
Right. And so this is this story is at the beginning of the book, which you can already see so it's not the first story. The first story is how Samuel is conceived, but the second story is about a family lineage that is already experiencing corruption. What happens when you don't raise your children right? What happens when they are entitled? What happens when what would happen if those people then assumed power? And so do we think the author likes inherited roles, does not like inherited roles? What's the opinion about leadership here?
Well, it depends upon the role you're inheriting. As long as the lineage is pure, it may be all right, but if it's corrupt, it's not. So, and God's going to solve the problem by having them all die young.
So what are we expecting to come with this kind of being at the beginning of the story? What are we going to expect for some of the rest of the stories?
Samuel's going to be the star.
Yeah.
And this is the part they leave out of the Sunday school lesson. It usually starts with the birth of Samuel and his mother bringing him the coat. And then it jumps to when Eli, in the night, Samuel hears the call. Never doesn't really get into the nitty gritty of the family. I mean, understandably, but you kind of, if you only went to Sunday school and it's your only knowledge from about the Bible, you really lose a lot. You don't know everything.
You miss you miss that part of it entirely. I mean, that's
Yeah.
just left out.
Yep.
Mhm. Yeah. And there's a sense that like Samuel is called in a way to interrupt bad leadership. And that is
Mhm.
important to the story of like, how do you deal with bad leadership? And here it seems like the solution is, well, we're just, to get better leadership, we have to trade out the whole slate of leaders. This family is not doing their job, so time to shuffle the deck again. We're going to interrupt this family who is not doing well and put someone else in place. So this is not the last time we are going to see the shuffling of the deck of the bad leadership replaced with better leadership.
Yeah.
So let's see. Any final thoughts for this kind of the introduction to 1st and 2nd Samuel, or the introduction to Samuel himself?
Well, I'll never look at my prime rib the same way.
I was thinking about brisket. You know, the brisket where they cook it for a long time so the fat on top melts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love brisket, but I every time I read a recipe, it just seems so complicated because you have to do it over 2 days. Anyway, so is this priest there, this person they're raising up, going to be Samuel?
Yes.
Okay.
So, right. So we have the 2 corrupt sons, and then we have this little boy who's dedicated to the temple, who is not, who is kind of in this subservient role. And we can think about why that would make for a better leader than the sons who have grown up entitled. But Eli is kind of responsible for bringing them all up. We will see Eli is not out of the picture yet. He has a role to play in Samuel's story.
Okay. So he doesn't get knocked off right away, huh?
No, no.
Okay. Oh, Samuel starts. Oh, he's training Samuel. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
You know, do you think there's anything in this? Doesn't well, the little boy wears an ephod, and isn't that part of the priestly garment?
Yes, it
And
is.
Yes.
so it's kind of an odd little thing, you know, toddler clothes and then priestly garment in the
Yeah,
same.
he looks like a little mini priest. It's
Yeah.
probably very adorable.
Yeah. Didn't you have a cowboy outfit when you were a toddler? I did.
So the ephod has some functionality, so that's kind of, I will, if I remember correctly, that's like kind of like the breastplate, but there's pockets in it. So you can carry around some of the tools you need in that, like in that top garment. So there's a reason he has it. All right, so for next time, we're just gonna focus on Samuel's call story, which is one of those classic Sunday school stories. So we're gonna spend a lot of time on that. Yeah, Larry?
But there's no meeting next Monday, right? Tuesday, the 15th?
Oh, correct. Yes. So it's gonna be 2 weeks. Next week, I have a week of continuing ed to work on some of the big changes that are happening at Northminster. So I'll see you in 2 weeks.
Yeah. So we'll convene on the 22nd.
Correct.
All right. Good.
All right. Well, folks, shall I pray us out for today? All right. Let us pray. Loving God, in our best version of ourselves, we look to you for guidance and leadership. We look to you in our own lives for direction, for day-to-day, to help us know what step to take, where to act, where to step back and not act. Because we know that humans are imperfect and we often get it wrong, but we read stories like the one today and we see that when we're not guided by you, we can start acting selfishly for our best interest instead of the best interest of everyone. Sometimes we become entitled because we are used to certain systems that benefit us, but we don't see how those systems hurt other people. Sometimes it's taking things away from you, and sometimes it's taking things away from your children, the people in our communities and in the world. So help us recognize when we need to be corrected. Help us be humble enough, unlike Eli's sons, that when we are given correction, we are able to hear it and we're able to change. And help us be humble leaders, not expecting that everything will go our way, but being willing to serve like Samuel, constantly looking for your guidance in the world. Because God, there is a lot going on at the moment between international conflicts, natural disasters, and another natural disaster on the way. So we lift up especially those that are recovering from the previous hurricane and those that are in the path of the hurricane that will likely make landfall today. Keep them safe. Keep the people who are leaving their homes safe. And we just pray for everyone in that path. We also pray for those in our community that are healing, that are going through life changes, and all those who just need especially your peace and your blessing. So we pray all these things in Jesus's name. Amen.
Amen.
All right.
Thanks.
Okie dokie.
All right. See you all either
Thank
on
you.
Sunday or in
Next
2 weeks.
time.